Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dr. Varmadi Singh, the chairman of this Joint Select Committee on the Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities. I welcome you all on behalf of myself and the members of my team. So welcome to the 33rd meeting of this Joint Select Committee. And this session is being recorded for subsequent broadcast. Little housekeeping rules that when we are, please, if you have your cell phones, please turn it off. And when you are speaking, you would turn the mic on, and when you finish, you can take it off. And on this occasion, I have the pleasure of meeting with the representatives of the Ministry of Health, the National Infrastructure Development Company, Pharmacy Board of Trinidad and Tobago, the School of Pharmacy, Faculty of Medical Sciences, UV St. Augustine's. And I would like to now invite members of the Ministry of Health to please introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Asif Ali, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, Chair and members. Dr. Roshan Parasram, Chief Medical Officer, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, members. Anissa Dudnat Sibu, Acting Principal Pharmacist, Ministry of Health.
Hi, good morning, members. Faraz Khan, Chief Chemist and Director, Chemistry, Food and Drugs, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, Chair and members.
The National Infrastructure Development Company to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Terry James. I'm the General Manager, Correction Chair, if you would permit me, of the National Insurance Property Development Company.
Great.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Roseanne Santos, Head of Pharmaceuticals with NIPDEC.
Good morning, everyone. Akash Mohan, Project Manager at NIPDEC.
Would members of the Pharmacy Board introduce themselves? Or himself, I think it's one member there.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Rahman, President of the Pharmacy Board of Trinidad and Tobago.
Welcome. Members of the School of Pharmacy, Faculty of Medical Sciences, University of the West Indies, please introduce
Good morning,
yourselves.
everybody. Myself, Dr. Rajiv Daya, Director, School of Pharmacy.
Welcome. I would like to invite the members of my committee to introduce themselves, starting with the Vice Chair.
Good morning, everyone. Ramona Ramdial, Vice Chairman.
Good morning again to everyone. Esmond Ford, member of this committee.
Good morning, everyone. Nigel De Freitas, member.
Good morning. Welcome to this session. I am Jennifer Witties Primus. I am a member of this committee.
Thanks. So I'd like to remind all the objectives of this inquiry. It's to assess the growth in the pharmaceutical industry, to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the Pharmacy Board or Council in executing its mandate, and to determine whether the resources, systems, and procedures of the Pharmacy Council are sufficient to allow it to operate efficiently. I would like to declare my interests before we proceed. I want to declare that I, in my professional capacity, I'm currently the President of the Medical Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and under Section 7.1 of the Pharmacy Board, our council elects 2 members to serve, medical practitioners from our general membership to serve on the Pharmacy Council, which comprises 10 members. At this stage, I would like to invite opening statements. Please not exceed more than 2 minutes because we have a lot of questions to get this going. And first, I'd like to ask Mr. Asif Ali, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health, if you can give us some opening statements.
Thank you. Good morning again, Chair, members of the committee, my colleagues from NIPDEC, School of Pharmacy, and the Pharmacy Board, members of the viewing and listening public. I think we can all agree that pharmacists, in collaboration with other healthcare professionals, perform a critical role in ensuring that patients properly take their medications as prescribed in seeking to improve and effectively treat their medical conditions. Pharmacies are also a key component of the national health ecosystem through counseling of patients during the prescription of drugs, providing drug information to their clients, and through their participation in health promotion programs. It is in this context that I take this opportunity on behalf of the Ministry of Health to reaffirm our commitment to the provision of quality pharmacy services in Trinidad and Tobago through the enforcement of the relevant regulations and legislation under the remit of this ministry. We also do this through our relationship with NIPDEC, which is responsible for the storage, procurement, and distribution of pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical items. And secondly, through our collaboration with the Pharmacy Board, which is the regulatory body for the profession. We look forward to today's proceedings with a view to providing suggestions and recommendations as we seek to improve and continue improving on the provision of pharmacy services nationally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would Mr. Terence James, General Manager of NIPDEC, please give us some opening remarks?
Thank you very much, Chair. And members, other colleagues, and members of the listening and viewing public. My name is Terry James. I'm the General Manager of NIPDEC, the National Insurance Property Development Company. NIPDEC is a state investment vehicle as a subsidiary of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. Our purpose and our mandate is in the strategic procurement and delivery of built environment products and services, and in the procurement, distribution, and storage of pharmaceuticals for the public sector. We do this in collaboration with all our stakeholders, and in this specific instance, with the Ministry of Health, with whom we seek constantly opportunities to optimize how our people, our processes, and our technology interact to give us the best outcomes. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to appear before you, the JSC, to aid you in your inquiry into the current systems and practices and regulations and the operations of pharmacies and the practice of pharmacy in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. James. Would Mr. Andrew Hammond, President of the Pharmacy Board, give us opening remarks, please?
Yes, morning everyone again, and I am indeed, it is a pleasure is mine to be part of this proceedings, especially in relation to the practice of pharmacy and the dissemination of medication to the public, and to address the concerns that I am aware that the public has. A lot of our regulation, in fact, all our regulation is actually enshrined in the law. So there is not much, meaning the Pharmacy Board Act and Pharmacy Board regulations. So in terms of discretion, there's not much discretion that we have in terms of activating the various policies and procedures. But in relation to the activities of the practice of pharmacy throughout the country, I'm indeed happy to be here to contribute to that process.
Thank you, Mr. Rahman. And would Dr. Rajiv Daya, Director of the School of Pharmacy, University of the West Indies, please give us some opening remarks?
Yeah. At School of Pharmacy, we are training the graduates for as pharmacists, and since '95 we have produced more than 700 graduates, as an average of 50 to 60 graduates per year. We work in collaboration with Pharmacy Board, regional bodies like CAP, Caribbean Association of Pharmacists, Pharmaceutical Society of Trinidad and Tobago, RHH in terms of outreach activities. So our products normally are consumed in the hospital setting and community, and we have limited exposure to pharma manufacturing industries. We are currently in transition from BSc four-year program to PharmD 5-year program, and also we are working on the post-graduation programs to train and polish more improved products. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you all have elaborated the importance of coming here today, the need that the needs that we have to look at how to change the system. We have seen complaints we have gotten from pharmacists, this puts in drugs like Cytotec, which could cause miscarriages, given medication, errant pharmacists, comes in that where you a pharmacist, this person, drugs like Valium, which can cause addiction. So we have cases like that. We have cases, situations and complaints where some pharmacists even have certain products that, may have been coming into suitcase traders. So all these are concerns we are looking at. We are looking at concerns from the ministry in terms of drugs being, persons want to bring in certain medication in the country, and it's taken long for the administration to give that approval for certain medications. All these issues we would look at and hope we can get some improvements. Even the issues of generic drugs, there are drugs coming in, and when the generic market opened up years ago, it certainly helped bring down the cost of drugs, but the quality is something that has to be looked at, because even in America, there were cases where the generic drugs, we looked at it, they looked at certain studies, they looked at companies in India, and it was mentioned in some studies that companies like Ranbaxy, IPCA, and these companies, Dr. Reddy, who presently have drugs here, there were some red flags raised. So we'll have to look at the monitoring system. And even cases where the late Prime Minister, Mr. Patrick Manning, when he got his stroke, his sister, who is a very esteemed in the medical profession, Petronella Manning, actually said that it was due to a generic inferior drug he got, warfarin, which actually caused his stroke. So that was labeled, it was in the newspaper. Ministry came out and had some, discussions about it. But all those are out there where you may have drugs out there that people may not trust. And we have to see, are there ways of monitoring these drugs? Are there ways to see if, the population is getting its money's worth? And then we have a new problem now with fake or counterfeit drugs, not generic now, with low standards, fake drugs coming in, where the drug companies are now challenged to put certain marks in place where they are knowing now that their drugs, you can go to the pharmacy and identify it's not a counterfeit drug available. So it's a problem we're having, and we're hoping with this discussion, we all could come to some conclusion that we can give a report which can really help the industry, right? So at this stage, I would like to invite my Vice Chair to open the lines of questioning.
Thank you very much, Chair. This question is directed to the President of the Pharmacy Board. Mr. Rahman, why have there been no audited accounts for the last 6 years?
Initially, the issue started off with an accident that our management person, our management accountant, well, she's not an accountant, she kept the management accounts. We received all our funds in the months of November, December, and January from pharmacists. There is no government input. We received no funding whatsoever from the government. And that period was a period where, based on the income that we have, where a pharmacist pays $12.50 a month to be a pharmacist, we could not at that time afford a replacement. I mean, a vagrant in front of a hot shop gets that in half an hour. We have a problem getting that fee increased.
So, I mean, is this $12.50 a year?
$12.50 a month.
A month, okay.
Which is $150 a year.
A year.
It was increased 20 years ago from $100 to the large sum of $150.
So do you get funding from any other, like the state? Do you get funding from the government?
We have been in existence for 59 years, and we have never received $1 from the state.
Okay.
Mr. Rahman, have you made requests to the Ministry of Health for additional resources over those years?
Yes, even before my time. I've been president for almost 16 years now. So throughout that time, there were numerous requests, and even before, because the increase was about 20 years ago. And that $100 was in place approximately 30 years ago. So over a 30-year period. So the request is not for increased funding, because we don't necessarily wish to get funding from the state, but for increased contributions from the members because we really would like to manage our own affairs.
What about requests for personnel to assist with respect to the accounting and bringing up the audited accounts to date? Have you made requests for personnel from the Ministry of Health or
No.
assistance with such?
No, our act prevents us from doing so.
Okay.
Our act, that's what I'm saying, a lot of the direction I'm seeing this going in are things that are dealt with in our act. Our act requires us to appoint auditors, us meaning at an AGM. We have also had a significant problem at AGMs where I can only explain it as when certain persons don't see that the election, the AGM is held, let me rephrase it, the election is held at an AGM. And our act directs us to appoint the auditors at that AGM. The quorum for such a meeting is 20 members. And the quorum for an election meeting is 7 members. So when results on many occasions in the recent past have been about to be announced, people leave the meeting and make it incorrect prior to us appointing auditors. So we have a difficulty in appointing the auditors when we have not gotten to that point in an AGM and people walk out and make it incorrect. And they don't get to achieve the objectives because the election part, which is attempted to be avoided, remains correct because the law reduces that quorum to 7.
Okay, Mr. Rahman, before I allow Member Batiste to ask a question, Mr. Batiste Primus to ask a question, I think the Pharmacy Act may need to be amended to get a greater amount of input. I think that may be something the ministry may have to look at to see if they can improve that act to some regulation that maybe that would allow your membership to increase their fee from $12.50 a month, right?
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rahman, are you comfortable knowing that the board over which you are the president, and you have been there for quite some time, I think you said just now 16 years, are you comfortable with the fact that the board has not produced any audited accounts for the past 6 years? Is that a situation that presents you with any challenges?
Yes, well, I explained the challenges are that we can afford, or at that time, to pay an auditor, but not the management accountant, the person to keep the management accounts. And that person got into an accident for that period. And subsequent to that, the methods that were used to continue collecting the funding continued the way it continued when she was absent, to some extent. But the main problem has been, so I do not know how I can get audited accounts without the appointment of an auditor. And I do not know how I can get the appointment of an auditor when the law says to do it in AGM, and the members knowingly, in my mind, diminish the AGM to something that is not an AGM by walking out of the meeting.
Right. Now, may I inquire, does the Act state how the items that would engage the AGM, the format of that agenda, is the format specifically outlined in the legislation?
No. On matters that in Section 712 of the Act, there are many things that the Act outlines, but 712 authorizes the Council to have conduct of its affairs. So we have attempted to move that to one of the earlier items in or one of the earliest items in the meeting.
You mean the appointment of the auditor?
Yes. But the meeting is so disruptive that there's a constant bantering about the election. Now, the election itself was subject to court action.
All right, okay, wait, Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
I'm just trying to understand so that I perhaps, based on my experience in organizations, similar organization, can help. Because if the act does not state the construct of the agenda, then the agenda is a predetermined activity. And if it is predetermined, then there's no need for you to rearrange the agenda at the meeting, but to determine before the meeting the run of the agenda. And I think you know it, anybody. If you're having problems with a particular item, you move it up so that you take the decision, that critical decision, and then have the elections as the last item.
No item gets completed because of the behavior of the members, not a single item. The only thing that that meeting entertains until they make it incorrect is quarreling about the election.
So
no matter where in the agenda we put it, first, last, middle, the only thing that happens in that meeting is quarreling about, and why I was just alluding, if I can be given a little leeway.
So clearly, we don't want the entire session to be taken up with this issue. Clearly, the pharmacy board is in controversy, which is impacting on the efficacy of the organization, clearly. Because if you can't have, if you're at your AGM, you cannot have a critical item which impacts on accountability issues. If that cannot be addressed, it means the organization is in turmoil. And there may be need for some kind of intervention. I don't know what kind, but certainly I'm quite sure, Mr. Rahman, you will agree the organization can't continue as is.
Well, the part that I disagree with, the organization has 900 and something members. And the persons that make this confusion, the number is no more than 5, you know. So I am not extrapolating 5 out of 900 and something
They have been
unruly
very
members.
so far, Mr. Rahman, because you all have not been able to appoint auditors.
5 out of 900 and something, I don't accept that to be a disruptive enough.
Remember, members, we would like to focus more on the industry rather than the internal run-ins. So,
I have one question
yeah, sure.
I think I need to ask. Your pharmacy board reports to who?
We are an act of parliament.
No. Who do you report to, your board?
No, we are the regulatory body for pharmacy. So we are the body that is the final arbiter of granting of licenses.
So you report to no one?
Well, we report to our members. We report to our members. They are the ones that contribute the funding,
Mr. Chair.
and we report to them.
Yeah. So for 16 years, you have been at the head of this board.
Yes.
Haven't been able to complete audit
Not for 16 years.
For the last 8 years, last 6 years. Right. And there is no one making an issue, no one have a concern of what is taking place with regards to, you know.
Yes, our members continue to express concerns.
But why would they then want to walk out of the meeting and leave it uncurated, for want of a better word, and not ensure that the business of the board takes place?
Well, that 5 has chosen to ventilate the matters on Facebook. And as a professional body, I have not even
so
Facebook.
What happens to another 895?
They have their concerns, but we have the loud ones.
we wouldn't want to go, we will be going off track. Now, before we go off track, very quickly, I think Ms. Ramdial has a question and Mr. De Freitas has a question. So we will, but we try to keep it because we have other stakeholders there. And
Yeah,
Mr. Rahman, with his years of service, he may be able to provide us with
Just very
other
quickly,
information.
Mr. Rahman, is there a process where these 5 disruptive members can be expelled or suspended from meetings so that you can carry about your business effectively?
Well, we attempted on one occasion to have the police assist us because they do not recognize the chair in keeping the meeting in an orderly fashion or non-disruptive fashion.
Member De Freitas?
Just quickly, as we move forward in this inquiry. So you're saying that an election cannot take place? What election is that? Is that election to the presidency or is that election to members of the board? What election are you referring to?
No. The election of the auditor.
Or the election of the auditor?
Yes, but in relation to the election of the members to the board, 6 members are elected by our peers. And that election is demanded in the law to be every 2 years. So despite the attempted disruption, I can't get into it, but the procedure for the election is not really at that meeting. That meeting is really merely to count the votes, with the exception of because you are permitted to vote before. So luckily, there's a facility where at no time it can ever be said that the members of the council are illegitimate members, because up to the last time we were required to have election, which was in 2018, and every 2 years before that, we had elections. So the election, there's a good procedure that is not able to be thwarted by the disruptive few. And it is that inability that angers them so much to disrupt the actual meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rahman. But as you're there in the seat, I want to ask you, I mean, there are allegations that there are errant pharmacists who may be given antibiotics, because even antibiotics that are given out without a prescription, you have a horrendous situation where you get antibiotic resistance now. And part of it, you're getting superbugs that are not being, we are not able to target. And the allegation made in certain pharmacies, you can go and get amoxil augmentin. Cytotec that can cause miscarriages or abortions, you can get it from pharmacists, Valium. And when you have complaints like that, or when as a medical professional you are getting that feedback, who is really responsible for looking at these pharmacists and saying, hey, to somehow get them to get their act together, or prevent them from doing these acts? Is it your body, who is a regulatory body, or is it the ministry would also have that function?
Well, we are a regulatory body in relation to the practice of pharmacy. There is a department in the ministry called the Drug Inspectorate that monitors the antibiotics. That does not mean that we do not get involved in the errant practices. And we have disciplinary powers to discipline pharmacists under Section 20 of the Act after an inquiry. However, it must be recognized that the persons who, for us to start an inquiry, we would require a complaint. And the person who we require, or information, and the person who we would usually get that information from would be the recipient of the antibiotic. But the recipient of the antibiotic wouldn't complain about getting the antibiotics because they save the doctor's fee. So we're in a kind of catch-22 situation where the persons who we have to get the information from are not willing to give the information, because if they give it, the next time they need antibiotics, they'll have to go to the doctor and pay $400 to get a prescription first to get it. So that has been, but there is a monitoring system where it should be able to be picked up. That is the abuse of giving out antibiotics through the monitoring system, which is really coordinated by the Ministry of Health, and they are very effective with it.
Is it only the antibiotics, or if you're prescribing certain medication that can cause addiction, like Valium or given out cytotec, could cause problems. So even a few years ago, Dinatil, which was a medication that was banned, it was only prescription, and it was needed prescription-wise, and they found that pharmacists were giving out these drugs, and it was an investigation by an Express journalist who went in and purchased these the medication and actually had an article about it. How could we, you see, we have to clarify, cases like that, could we have a system whereby a complaint system, either through the ministry, we may ask that question, direct that question after, where not just for antibiotics, but for other medication abuse, or who do we look at for a complaint, and any sort of recommendations you might be able to give also?
Well, the same considerations apply. Equally, to get the other items, which they would usually require a prescription for, the person who is the person to give us that information is the person who is benefiting from getting it. So whether it is antibiotics, narcotics, controlled drugs, Valium, Dinatil, or cytotec, the persons who get it save approximately $400 on each occasion they need to get it. And that process doesn't facilitate them coming to us and say, to complain about getting it.
Ministry of Health, you have any comments to make on that? Because if an Express journalist can go and purchase these drugs from a pharmacist or pharmacies, do you have a policing system whereby you go into pharmacies and try to get medication that are prescription only?
Well, there is a policing system, not to function in that manner. So when we would have gotten our questions received, how many complaints were received by the ministry concerning the operations of pharmacies, we had indicated to Joint Select that we had 18 of those. In terms of the pharmacist itself or himself, we had 77 over the previous period, which was 5 years, and it would have varied. So some of them would have been covered already. For instance, pharmacists not being present at the time of visiting, pharmacists dispensing drugs without prescriptions, that sort of complaints. So the Drug Inspectorate, of which the principal pharmacist is the head of the unit, inspects most pharmacies like about 2 to 3 times per week at the present schedule to try to pick up those irregularities. Outside of the antibiotics, there's also a system through the CDAP program, where CDAP monitors actually visit much more frequently than that, all the pharmacies that do CDAP prescriptions. So that will be probably at least visiting a pharmacy once every 2 months or thereabouts.
So we may need a sort of a sting operation to pick up those errant pharmacists, and you probably could introduce a method from the ministry. I think Member De Freitas and Member Baptiste Primus would have questions directed.
Just one question in relation to the monitoring of the pharmacies and the procedure by which they dispense medication. You were indicating that through the CDAP program, there's more monitoring taking place. I noticed in one of the responses that you would have given to the committee, I counted it out, there were about 35 pharmacies. Now, mind you, some of these pharmacies are just subsidiaries of a larger company, but there were 35 pharmacies that were taken off the CDAP program for breaches. What happens after that? Because what you're talking about is the dispensing of medicine or the failure to follow a particular procedure that has serious implications if that procedure is not followed. Is it that the license is revoked then from that pharmacy when they don't follow that procedure, or is it that you just take them off the CDAP program, or you give them a warning, but they're still continuing to do whatever it is that they're doing?
So the reason for the breach would lead to whatever course of action follows. So for instance, if a pharmacist has been repeatedly warned not being present at the time of your visit, the monitors, CDAP monitors would have gone once or twice or 3 times. They write them a letter. If it continues, then the CDAP, they can be removed from the CDAP program quickly, which is under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Health and NIPDEC. If we also do a report to the pharmacy board at that time, the pharmacy board has jurisdiction over the actual license of the pharmacy. And as Mr. Rahman has said, there's proceedings in his act disciplinary procedures that can be followed. So we refer those cases to the pharmacy board for further action. But as the Ministry of Health, we can't take action against the pharmacist directly.
So then let me ask the board, how many pharmacies have been removed? How many licenses have been revoked because of bad procedure?
Well, there are 2 licenses that are granted, which is a license to the pharmacist, and then there's a license to the pharmacy. The usual, as far as I know, the only breach is not about anything to do with harm to the patient in relation to dispensing medication. The only breach is that they would have visited the pharmacy on 3 occasions, and for those 3 occasions, they didn't meet the pharmacist. So it is not a patient or public safety issue. It is the absence of a pharmacist. A pharmacist must go to lunch. He must have lunch. So I'm saying that sometimes there's limited inquiry about the reason for the absence. Things happen. If we invite someone and they explain to us that on the first occasion, the mom fell down and had to take them to hospital, what do we do? And on the second occasion, the son got a bus head in school and they had to go out. So I am saying it is not a practice of pharmacy deficiency or problem for the society. It is an absence at the particular time, admittedly, on 3 consecutive occasions that the CDAP monitor would have visited, not to check on the medication or if they're giving out too much or if they're wrong dispensing, solely on the presence of the pharmacist. And there have been complaints with some of the monitors that if a pharmacist arrives when they are leaving, so the pharmacist went next door, that it is recorded. I think it is adjusted, but there was a time that the pharmacist would have been recorded as absent. If they were walking in, the monitor spends 5 minutes. They spend a lot more now. They're doing a lot more work now. But at that time, that monitor comes to get the pharmacist to sign and leaves. So if the pharmacist is next door, the pharmacy board doesn't view that as such a serious
So then,
breach.
I understand exactly where you're coming from. So that begs the question. So the Ministry of Health that is doing the monitoring of these pharmacies and has the standards and the procedures that need to be followed, and the ones that, to a certain extent, would discover the breaches. What do you have to say to that? Because if I'm seeing 35 pharmacies in breach of just CDAP alone, and therefore removed from that, and then the pharmacy board is saying, well, the threshold for removing or revoking a license is very high, then it begs the question, we have pharmacies in this country that are doing wrong things and are continue to do so.
Can I just have I am saying we have pharmacies that are absent.
Right, so the absence
not
of the
in the
pharmacist.
practice of pharmacy, yeah? They are absent, and they are absent sometimes to get lunch, to take their mom to the hospital and those things. What do we do? Do we suspend the license because they have to go to the hospital with a parent?
No, that's fine. But what I'm saying is that there's a monitoring process involved for CDAP. I'm just using CDAP as the example. So let's say one of the breaches is you dispense a wrong drug, or you have a drug inside of the pharmacy that's not supposed to be there. And therefore, that is sent to the pharmacy board, and the pharmacy board, through yourself, is saying that in order to revoke a license of the pharmacist, I'm assuming it's the pharmacist you're talking about, the only way that process takes place is if the pharmacist is not there 3 times in a row, and you're giving valid excuses as to why a pharmacist may not be there. What I'm saying is that you have this monitoring take place with different criteria, and the only way to revoke a license is if the pharmacist isn't there. So I'm saying there may be problems in a particular pharmacy, and that will allow to continue because the pharmacist is there. You're dispensing the wrong drug, or you find a drug that's not supposed to be there, the pharmacist is there. You can't revoke a license because the pharmacist is there. But the public is getting the tail end of that bad decision or bad action.
Well,
And that's why I'm asking the Ministry of Health,
Yeah, sure.
what do you think about
Yeah,
this?
so basically, I think there's a little misunderstanding. The Ministry of Health does not only monitor for absence of pharmacists. We monitor for everything in terms of dispensation of wrong drugs, the stock count at the pharmacy at the point in time, whatever it may be. What Mr. Rahman is indicating is that under his act, he can only act in terms of the pharmacist's license if there's breaches of that regard. So we look at breaches beyond that, and I think NIPDEC can lend some assistance in terms of the types of breaches that we would have looked at over the years and what in regard to the CDAP in those 35 cases, and give some examples of what we would have pulled them out of the CDAP program for.
You see, I have a problem there that if your monitors see that a pharmacy is not operating properly, and you move your monitor, it means now they can get away with anything. It means now they are under no supervision again, because you have now removed the monitor who would look into the fact that the pharmacist is not there. And then that pharmacist now could operate. Even those pharmacies that do not have the CDAP program, they may be there, and there's now that lack of that monitoring system that the CDAP program would, allow. So somehow we have to get a system in place.
Before NIPDEC answers, I think what we said before is that through the principal pharmacist, the monitoring outside of CDAP still occurs, right? So that will happen. That will continue to happen. And I suppose more so if you have been removed from the CDAP program.
Cheers, thank you. Just to offer some clarity around how we do the monitoring, so it will actually aid the committee in reaching a determination in this matter. Over the past 5 years, we've actually had 35 pharmacies removed from the program, which is about 7 a year on average, if we actually use that. And firstly, the way that a pharmacy would actually come into the program is they would make an application, and we would do them 5 visits in about 3 months, just to make sure that everything is all right. But in that 5 visits, we don't only check the pharmacy. We check the storage conditions, where they're going to store the drugs. We actually change the issues around management. We check stock management levels. We check many other things about the suitability of the pharmacy to actually come onto the program. When a pharmacy actually comes off the program for, let's say, breach of some part of the procedures that we have, they got to wait for about 3 to 4 months to come back on. When they come back on, they got to go through that 5 monitoring visits again in a specific period of time before they can come back on. I just wanted to be able to share that, so you have some kind of understanding of the rigor that is actually going through in order first to be able to take them off when we find a problem, and secondly, to bring them back on.
Thank you kindly, Mr.
James.
Thank you kindly, Mr. James. You've clarified a number of concerns that I had. Mr. Chairman, if you would permit me, we have had the benefit of submissions from Superfarm. We have had the benefit of submissions from the Pharmaceutical Society of Trinidad and Tobago. We have had the benefit of submissions from Mr. Kenrick Cumberbatch, who has been a pharmacist of many, many, many years standing. Throughout many of these submissions, there is a common concern and a common thread, so that I need this question would be directed to Mr. Rahman and Mr. Asif Ali, you and your team at the Ministry of Health. For example, the Pharmaceutical Society advised us on what the Pharmacy Board Act provides for. And some of the requirements are publishing the list of registered pharmacists every year. My question is to both you, Mr. Rahman, and the Ministry of Health, is this done? Is a list of registered pharmacists published every year? Just simple yes or no. Another requirement, convening an annual general meeting inside a specific time frame every year with specific methods of notice to members. Convening an election meeting every 2 years inside a specific time frame with specific methods of notice to members. Laying financial statements to its membership in the AGM. Providing audited statements of accounts in the AGM. Convening meetings of the Council of the Pharmacy Board at least once every quarter, provision of inspectors to audit pharmacies, formation of subcommittees to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of Pharmacy Board and Council in executing its mandate. In the past, there are at least 4 such subcommittees: the Disciplinary Committee, Education Committee, Public Sector Committee, Private Sector Committee. What we would advise is that these have not functioned since 2012. Another interesting statement made by Superfarm, and I want to put it into the records, and my question will follow up to Mr. Rahman and the Ministry of Health. And I quote what Superfarm said, in part. Most times, in an effort to try and expedite the process and obtain current licensure, the only recourse is to collect documents at various establishments where the president may be employed. By estimate, approximately 80% of the Pharmacy Board business is handled externally. The president of the Pharmacy Board is responsible for processing all licenses and practicing certificates for pharmacists. However, the office does not adhere to fixed hours, and there are no set office hours. In the president's own words, he's overwhelmed with too much work. His extremely busy schedule does not allow for him to process requests timely or adhere to any timelines established. They are grossly understaffed and, by all indications, inadequately financed. In fact, no one is sure of the exact status of the Pharmacy Board finances. Now, my question is, throughout these submissions, there are very grave concerns. My question to the Ministry of Health, firstly, is the Ministry of the view that the Pharmacy Board is adequately fulfilling its mandate?
Chair, through you, maybe I can let my legal advisor speak to that one.
Pharmacists. No report comes to the ministry on those activities.
So, Mr. Chairman, my question remains. What is the view of the ministry with regards to the Pharmacy Board? Is the ministry of the view that the Pharmacy Board is achieving its mandate, fulfilling its mandate, or no, it is not because of certain challenges? The Ministry of Health must have that kind of oversight.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're speaking to the issue of governance here. Thank you, Member. In terms of what is the role of the ministry as it pertains not just to the Pharmacy Board, it's a broader issue. In terms of the other regulatory agencies or bodies, we have the Medical Board, the Nursing Council, and the Pharmacy Board. And I think that's something that we have to take on board as a ministry in terms of what is our role and to what extent do we provide oversight of these regulatory bodies.
It can't be. Okay, so we have been told earlier, one of my colleagues asked, to whom does the Pharmacy Board report or accounts to? To whom? So is it Mr. Rahman, the Pharmacy Board does not account to the to the Ministry of Health, does not account to the Parliament, does not account to anyone?
We account to our members, and I have looked at section 66 of this, under which this committee has been, and I wrote a letter actually to the administrative people saying that this committee has jurisdiction over local authorities, which the pharmacy is not, service commissions, which the pharmacy is not, municipal corporations, which the pharmacy is not, and entities. And those entities are entities.
Mr. Hammond, excuse me. At this committee, we would like to more, I know the direction is going more to the internal run-ins, but I want to pull it back in to the function of the board, the ministry, NIPDEC, into providing services for the population. So let's try and pull it back in, rein it a bit in.
But Chairman,
Yes.
the member, Mr. Rahman might be making a very valid point that would inform this committee of the need for certain expansion. I'm interested in hearing the
What he
fullness of
has to
his
say.
response, yes.
But we'll have to, the time is going, so we'll have to try to see if we could condense it and move on to the other stakeholders.
Right. I'm happy for the opportunity to respond because a whole plethora of unsubstantiated allegations were made, some of which are attributed to my saying. I'm not senile as yet. I have never said those things that Superfarm is saying that I have said. But I am saying that the only other entity that this committee had jurisdiction over were entities that were funded by the government with more than 2/3 of its funding annually. In our 59 years of operation, we have received $0, 0 years. And the other entity that the committee has jurisdiction over is an entity in which the government appoints the majority of its members. That is in section 66A of the Constitution. We are in a situation where not the government, but the Minister of Health appoints 2 members out of 10, which is 20%. So I am here out of, in my legal view, out of courtesy and respect for the Parliament, because the particular Joint Select Committee under which I am invited here is not, in my legal view, a committee that has jurisdiction over the pharmacy board. The jurisdiction over the pharmacy board is by its members.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to expressly thank Mr. Rahman for the views he has just expressed. They are very instructive to this committee.
One thing came out of the revelation from the Society of Pharmacists was the duty of the pharmacy board to also have inspectors in place to monitor the pharmacies. So is that a duty you have to do also in part of your portfolio?
Well, I want to preface that by saying that all the society, well, not all, the society members are those persons that make the council meeting unmanageable. Because
Mr. Rahman,
yes.
So I understand there's that conflict, but you see what I'm trying to gather is, I'm looking at what sort of supervisory level we have, what sort of a monitoring system we have, and I'm happy to hear that NIPDEC has in place, Ministry of Health has in place, meaning, you have your CDAP and your Drug Inspectorate. And now if you get the adequate funding by actually approaching the Ministry of Health to change your act to increase your membership fee, and you're able to so afford these inspectors, I mean, is it under your portfolio also to have inspectors? So if you have the funding and you're able to hire that, I'm looking, there's another line of inspectors or persons who we monitor, because really speaking, we really need to monitor these pharmacies. So is that under your portfolio?
Yes, so you answered it in three components that I have. One is at $12.50 a month, we cannot employ inspectors. Two is we piggyback on the inspections of the drug inspectorate, the chemistry, food and drugs, who would usually report any problems to us also, and also of NIPDEC. So we have three components of the ministry while we are unable to employ our inspectors of our own because of lack of funding or fees. We already wanted to be funding, we wanted to be fees from our members.
Sure. Mr. Ramdial has a question.
Thank you. To the Ministry of Health. Now, according to the Pharmaceutical Society, they are stating that foreigners are being hired before the locals. How many non-nationals are serving as pharmacists in the Ministry of Health and the RHAs? And what factors necessitated the recruitment of foreign pharmacists in our country?
Chair, I don't have the numbers. I will have to get that for you. I can submit that in writing. These are the number of non-nationals that are still employed in the public sector.
There were, again, we had persons approach us and say that the Ministry of Health is considered or have brought in pharmacists from Cuba. Is that a fact? Yeah.
Yes, we would have brought in some pharmacists from Cuba recently, and the numbers, 11, Chair. 11.
Is it, just to cut in, is it that we have a shortage of pharmacists in Trinidad and Tobago that we need to bring in these foreigners?
I don't think there's a shortage. I think the issue lies in the remuneration packages that we offer in the public sector versus what is paid in the private sector for our pharmacists. And the ability of the public sector to be able to retain and attract pharmacists coming out into the sector. So we have an issue in that regard, where we're looking at the packages, seeing where the analogy lies with the private sector, and if need be, approaching CPO to see if the packages can be improved so we could actually get people into the system.
So can you tell us, Dr. Parashram, as an example of comparison, what is the remuneration in the public sector as compared to the private sector?
Right, so again, we will have to get the specifics of it, and we could submit that in writing to you.
Mr. Rahman, can you add any information to this?
Mr. Ahmed, excuse 1 minute. You were there years in this society. And I remember when they first brought in the Cuban nationals is when there was a shortage of pharmacists years ago under, I think it was Minister Rahel. You might be able to give us some of that history. But also, I would need to know the amount of pharmacists they have in Trinidad and Tobago, and is there really a need for external sourcing in the light of so many persons asking for jobs in our market? So we would need to know that, and then I would want to direct questions to the university about training of pharmacists and the need. Yeah. So let's, best practice.
Yes, 50, it wasn't Cubans at that time, it was Philippine pharmacists. So 50 Philippine pharmacists were brought into the country, and there was a definite shortage.
That was something, I think it was Minister Rahel at the time.
Yeah,
yes,
I do remember, yes, his exact year. And subsequent to that, I received a call from him for us to negotiate with the university and increase output of pharmacists. The output was supposed to be for 1 year. So I contacted the university. They said they could train 50. We used to train approximately 10 to 14 per year, 10 to 14. We increased that number to 50 that year. The university said they could train 50, we trained 50. The pharmacy board provided 50 to be trained. That was supposed to be a temporary measure. Since that, the university has continued to train between 50 to 80 pharmacists annually. So we do have an excess of pharmacists, Trinidadian pharmacists, paid for by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, who cannot get jobs based on their complaints in the public service. Now, the salaries, the remuneration is a little lower. It is not excessively lower because it has improved significantly. Because under the PSA, we got pharmacists to be converted from the technical, Mrs. Primus might be able to tell me, the technical cadre, I think, to the professional cadre. And that was the source of a significant salary increase in the government service. So I am not sharing the view that what I do know is that there were certain problems some time ago, I think it has been resolved now, with local pharmacists' unwillingness to mix certain hazardous chemicals without the proper protective equipment. And we're talking about radiation cancer causing things. And what had happened some years ago was that the foreign pharmacists were willing to assist. So that has been my membership's take on it, that it has to do with ability to get some more duties done. But our pharmacists have not been, local pharmacists have not been complaining about doing it. They have been complaining about the risks to doing it with all the proper protective
Well, they are OSHA
equipment.
standards, and I mean,
Yes.
they have to, when you're mixing those chemicals, it's dangerous, so I could understand. Mr. Rahman, also the fact that, so if there's an excess of pharmacists in the country, now we have to ask the ministry now, why is there a need? Is it as a cost factor? And other thing too, is there a language problem? Do they have to go some sort of English proficiency or, test to see if they can understand what's happening here?
Chair, so let me answer your second question first. Yes, there is an English proficiency test that we put them through. When we seek to recruit, they have to go through an English proficiency test to ensure that they can speak and write English. That's to answer your second question. Your first question, it has been a challenge with regard to remuneration. CMO is correct. That has been a challenge for us in terms of we would have advertised the positions and not gotten persons on board. Just want to clarify one thing that the President spoke about with regard to the mixing of the chemotherapy drugs. It is not so much the protective equipment. The equipment is available. It is more an issue of the compensation for mixing. All right, so it's not a safety issue of the equipment or the PPE. It is more an issue of the allowance to be paid for mixing of those drugs. Just to clarify that.
With just a question. So I understand the remuneration package may not be enough to attract individuals. That's understandable. But then the university was saying you pump out 50 to 60 graduates a year. Does the private sector have that capability or that demand? So where are all these people going? 50 to 60 a year in the private sector?
If you look at the numbers for CDAP alone, we have on our books 252, I believe, as of 2019 in terms of number of pharmacies. The total number of private pharmacies is beyond that, way beyond that. So it would seem that we have the absorptive capacity in the private and public sector to retain all these people at this point in time. But there must become a point in the future that we have to look at to see that capacity will be overshot and we won't be able to absorb those people.
And 1 second, and that's why we always end up, Mr. Chairman, back at the board, because the board is the one issuing the licenses to pharmacies and pharmacists. So let me ask this question. Is there a limit that you all have in mind in relation to the number of pharmacies? Have we crossed the threshold whereby we have too much pharmacies in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, based on proper regulation of our Act, if someone reads the Act and abides by the requirements to open a pharmacy and apply to the pharmacy board to open a pharmacy, we would find ourselves as a recipient of court action if they have fulfilled the requirements. So there's no, we actually used to regulate at one time, and in today's world that would have been illegal, regulate the quantity of pharmacies that were put out. So that has stopped. But we are at the point where, and the proof of it is in the fact that through the RHAs, where students have to apply to do the pre-reg, students lose, I don't think students can afford 3 months' salary. They lose 3 months' salary by not being able to get pre-registration employment in the private sector, and is forced to wait on the RHAs to employ them for pre-registration, who don't start their pre-registration program until 3 months late. So I think that is proof people will not just lose salary, because if the government, if the private sector could have absorbed them, all of them who start their period in September, which is they're supposed to start on the 1st of July. If that was so, then they will not be waiting on the government sector to get into an RHA. So I am somewhat disputing the fact that the private sector can absorb them now. We cannot absorb them. There's still not enough pharmacies to employ all of them.
So then, again, this whole thing is a wheel. So back to the university, what does that mean for your entry into the pharmaceutical program, knowing or hearing here today that there's some saturation taking place?
Well, yeah, recently we have the issue, we have some students which are complaining we are not consumed. So I'm thinking some another way. Here in Trinidad, we have pharmacy sector, we are concentrated on health only, like either they are consumed in hospital setting or as community. So, and remaining is government service, which is less proposed. But we are not thinking of pharmaceutical industries where a 50% market is there, where their R&D scope is there, where we are nowhere, and pharmaceutical marketing. So more plants should come there. Some standard industry should come here, and then we because in terms of pharmaceutical industry here, I'm finding nothing. And in our training, we are also lacking that. If we will train, we are going to develop the PharmD program. We are going to develop the MSc programs. But where the fellow will consume? We are upgrading ourselves. Since 18 years, we are producing the graduates, and they are going in the same.
Excuse me, could you just speak a little slower first? Because a little slower in answering. Yeah.
So my thing was, basically, I'm from India. So I compare the market from there and here. So there is a large number of pharmaceutical industries where our graduates are consumed. Okay. So here I found only in the pharmacy setting where community pharmacy and hospital setting, they are going majorly. So we are lacking a big sector where manufacturing chemist, R&D specialist, which we can train and are cannot be occupied because of lack of pharmaceutical industries. So pharmaceutical industrial plants should be invited to Trinidad and Tobago, so that such type of, and it will be asset, because we are nowhere near patents or these clinical trials. In that field, we are not moving further.
Industry in and of itself is pretty diverse, and ours in Trinidad and Tobago is not as diverse. We don't have, like, as he's saying, the creation of drugs or the invention of drugs to solve certain problems. So as you're training graduates who could end up and specialize in those areas, and that's a way that they could end up, as opposed to just going into a pharmacy or working in the hospital. I understand.
And I think Barbados has a line also where they have a pharmaceutical industry where they actually make medication.
Yeah.
So your level of, looking at the future of the pharmaceutical industry is something, you could look forward and probably liaise with the ministries, the relevant ministries.
Yeah.
So is it that we have a percentage of our pharmacists migrating and leaving and sourcing jobs out of Trinidad and Tobago?
No, up till now, it's okay. But now some cases are coming that we are not getting job. Then how? So we have to think on that how to train them further. So if there will be additional options, it will be good. It will not give heavy on one particular sector.
One question before. In terms of pharmacists coming in from abroad, be it India, Cuba, is there a level of certification or some sort of a level to see if their degree is at the same standard that the university, or is it acceptable standard? Mr. Rahman?
Yes, under the Section 18 of the Pharmacy Board Act, there's 18, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 deals with people from CARICOM, 2 deals with people not from CARICOM, and 4 deals with the UA people. So it is in our law. Their degree has to be accredited by the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, where they have to get a certificate of registration. So there's a reasonably extensive regime for registration. But generally speaking, our registrations have been on hold. I think the ministry, I recall the Ministry of Labor, I think I'm correct, having a committee to look at this issue of the quantity of foreigners we had here working as professionals. That wasn't for pharmacy only, and to correlate it with our reaching saturation point. So, to be fair, or to be honest, we have not been entertaining too many. We explain it directly to them that there is a problem with the quantity of pharmacists in Trinidad. So there is a proper regime of registration, strict regime of registration, but we have not been entertaining that much now because of how many Trinidadians that the government paid for primary, secondary, and tertiary education and will not get education, will not get employment because of somebody who the government did not pay for from a foreign country.
So then you're saying that government spends money in probably gate or whatnot to educate the pharmacists, but when they're coming in, they're not getting jobs? And they're getting people from Cuba.
We have some that are taking a very long time to get jobs, and some are, I have a lot of complaints now who can't get. We have quite a few right now who are complaining about the length of time they're looking for jobs and can't get.
Okay. Then again, the Cuban pharmacists that are coming in, do they have to get a certification, some license from your committee, or how are they practicing? Do they have to say, well, I'm a pharmacist?
Yes, the applications have been sent to the council. It is a government application. We are trying, we will do the process. But for other people, we have been, I would say, trying to dissuade them, because they now have to grapple with getting a work permit. And if they can't secure a work permit, that is what we have been telling them, because we have informed the Work Permits Division of our issues with granting work permits to foreigners when so many, I think there we are party to some treaty that work must be preserved for your citizens first.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, they have actually been refusing some. One of the few that would have gotten a renewal, a pharmacist, would have been because he was from Syria and was able to make a case about war there. But there are quite a few who had work permits in the government service, left, and came out in private, and was refused work permit subsequently, because one of the requirements of the ad is that what used to happen is that the employers would come to the Work Permits Division and say that we cannot find a local to fill the position. And the Ministry of Labor, in conjunction with National Security, put as a requirement in the ad that applicants must also send their application to the Ministry of Labor. There's a big name for it now, excuse me for not knowing the full name. And that way, when employers come and apply for a work permit and complain that they can't find a local, the Ministry of Labor is able to supply a plethora of people that would have applied for the job. So that has solved that problem.
That's the point I was trying to get. But you have to help me here, Mr. Rahman, because you have not published, the board has not published a list of pharmacists, qualified pharmacists. So that my question is, do you have a feel in terms of how many pharmacists we have, qualified pharmacists in this country? Do you have a feel? If there's not, if the list, we know it's a fact, you have admitted that no list is available. But what's the feel? What's the feel? Do we have 100, maybe in the region of 200, 300 pharmacists? Is it that the market is saturated?
Yeah, I have an exact amount because annually, pharmacists must apply for their, so we might not have a list that has been published because of funding, but we have the exact amount. This year, thus far, it is, I think it's 822 would have applied, yes, would have applied for re-registration and was granted practicing certificates. There are some who may not wish to practice in a particular year and they may not apply for it. There are some who may be in transition, going away. There are
We are
some
talking about 2019.
2019, yes. Yes,
Do
I
you,
think that's my
based-
last figure.
Based on the fact that your exact figure is 822, is it your opinion that 822 pharmacists, is that number, can that number satisfy the local needs?
Well, based on the quantum of complaints I have, I'll judge it first from pharmacies. If we're approaching maybe, let's say 380 pharmacies, I have an exact figure too, which I haven't checked recently. Each pharmacy would require at least one. Well, they must have a responsible pharmacist assigned to that pharmacy, and we will grant license to that responsible pharmacist. So we're looking at around 380, 390. Admittedly, they are open for long hours, and they do require relief pharmacists. That might take the absorptive capacity of the private sector to be somewhere around closer to 400 to 500. So there are well over 300 pharmacists available to the public sector, because quite a few of the pharmacies are pharmacist-owned, a good percentage, and those that are pharmacist-owned, they watch their business. If their pharmacy is open for 12 hours, they work for the 12 hours. So it is the non-pharmacist-owned, which might factor about 50%,
So,
that requires relief.
so would you say that the Trinidad and Tobago market is saturated at this point in time?
Well, going to the quantity that I have seeking my assistance to help them with employment, which never happened. Within my first 12 years of the presidency, I have never ever gotten a request. There were shortages, admittedly, for assistance with employment. Over the last 3 to 4 years, and maybe the last 2 years, I have been inundated with requests for assistance for employment.
Because, Mr. Chairman, that information is important because, as Mr. Rahman quite correctly pointed out a short while ago, the Ministry of Labor plays a role in the granting of work permits for non-nationals. And many of those requests, I have sight of those requests for work permits. And in many instances, the employer who would make the request must advertise, because we have a very grave responsibility to ensure that our nationals are not being left aside in favor of non-nationals. And hence the reason why I wanted Mr. Rahman, as the president of the pharmacy board, to indicate if there's a saturation, because then I know that we at the ministry, we're on the right path in terms of very rare do I agree as the line minister, because I had a sense that we had sufficient pharmacists, but a sense is not really a scientific measurement of what the needs are. But I want to ask this question. Do you think that there is need for national needs assessment of the pharmacy sector in Trinidad and Tobago?
In specific relation to the oversupply, or in relation to the oversupply, I think we are clear that there is an oversupply now. And at this point, the oversupply will be exacerbated from this year with whatever is the quantity that the university has now.
So as president of the pharmacy board,
yes.
What would be your advice to me as the Minister of Labor presiding over those requests for applications for work permits for persons to come into Trinidad and Tobago to function, to work as pharmacists? What would be your advice as the president of the pharmacy board?
Well, I'm not in favor of the grant of it because we have too many. I mean, if they were even paying for themselves, that's our locals. But for quite some time, it is the government who has been paying for their education. And I think that they should be given the opportunity to work here. We are also inundated at this point with requests for something called good standing letters for people to leave and go. So the people that will be benefiting from the Trinidad government's use of money for education.
We are not getting a return on our investment.
Yes. Now, and in the first place, all that are applying will not get to go. But I'm just saying shortage of pharmacists for some years has been a worldwide problem. Every conference I attend, that has been a problem. So there is some capacity to take them. And that capacity is also worldwide, because worldwide they have started training much more when I go to the international conferences. So while some will go, many will remain without jobs. And those who go, we are still not getting the benefit of our expenditure on them, because they get the education free and then go and give the service to foreign countries.
All right, I want to expressly thank you, Mr. Rahman, for that elucidation. My final question, because I'm listening to you, the information flow is very, very much appreciated, but I keep hearing you saying, we have done this and we have done that. Is the pharmacy board at this present point in time properly constituted? You're a lawyer. Would you say you are properly constituted?
There has been a to and fro even in the public about the difference between a quorum and the Constitution. We have a quorum because under Section 7 of our Act, a quorum is 5 members, one of which must be an appointee.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rahman. What the question should have had included in it, in light of the fact that an AGM should have been held since March this year, do you hold the view that your board is properly constituted?
Well, the board is all members, all pharmacists, so the council.
The council, I'm sorry,
right.
Yes.
So the council at this point, I have heard that they have been appointed. I am saying that the Constitution, it must be constituted. And at this point, we have the 6 elected members. We have the 2 members appointed by the minister. But we don't have, and I'm hearing that it is in the middle to come, the appointees of the medical board.
So would you say, having said that, would you say that the council is properly constituted at this point in time?
No.
Thank you for your honesty.
Mr. Rahman, before we dive, and thank you, member. Per capita, have we made it in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the amount of pharmacists we have?
Oh, I have no idea. I am judging it solely on scarcity of jobs for people, but I don't know what is the international standard.
And to the university representatives, we are getting the impression that you may soon be producing pharmacists that we may not have the needs for in Trinidad. Have you, in terms of when people are applying, I mean, are there a lot of persons applying every year? Do you have to refuse applicants? And again, is the standard of your pharmacy degree accepted in other countries that our persons here can go out and get a job? The accreditation of it.
Yeah, that is the only issue. That's why we are shifting the BSc Pharmacy 4-year program to the 5-year PharmD program. Because especially in states, if any person moves from here, their all 4-year course are converted into 5-year minimum course. So our students at BSc level now are not able to write their exam. So that's why we are moving to that.
Just one observation. So we found out today that that particular industry is relatively saturated. We found out that individuals that have graduated would prefer to leave, to remain in industry. They would prefer to wait until a private sector job comes up. And then we've also heard that there is jobs in the public sector. Now, one of the reasons for this was remuneration. The question I want to ask is, and it might have been answered prior, but I just want to ask it again. is the difference really that large that somebody who does not have a job, who spent all of these years training, would prefer to stay unemployed instead of get a few dollars less? Is that what's happening?
Maybe I can not maybe directly answer the question. We have advertised the positions, and we have not been getting the applicants. The reason might be the remuneration, as you said, and even if they apply, they might not accept the job. That might be relative, member. I mean, what is massive for me might not be massive for yourself, for somebody else. So I'm not sure. But as I said, we have advertised positions.
You understand my reasoning, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not to say that, I mean, you could get the job in the public sector, you're qualified, you're a pharmacist, you've gotten the license from the board. And then if a private sector job comes up or you want to open your own pharmacy, then you move to do that. My point is that you literally, from what I'm hearing, saying that you rather stay unemployed, as in not receive any money at all, than actually pick up a public sector job. And I'm wondering if remuneration is the only reason. That just seems a little bit weird to me. I'm not saying that you have to stay in the public service job, but...
Chairman, there's a wider question here. Mr. Rahman said that based 822 pharmacists have been granted re-registration for 2019. And to his mind, the market is saturated. Yet the university continues to churn out. And that's the point member Nigel De Freitas is making. Yet the university continues to churn out numbers. So clearly there is need for building some synergies here. Because if the market is saturated, then why are we training? Are we training for the external markets? Then if that is what we are doing, there must be a clear policy regarding such an approach.
I agree, because it's taxpayers' money going in to train these persons who may be leaving. One question I'd like to ask, the package that they has offered in the public sector, do you have the figures available in the public and the private sector?
Not only, Chair, but
Could
we
you
can
please
provide that to you.
provide it to
Sure,
us?
definitely, we can.
Member Ford would have a question.
Thank you. I would like to quote from one of the stakeholders that presented us with some information. Improper storage and transportation of drugs, including cold chain, could result in decreasing the potency of these drugs, ultimately affecting patient care and positive outcomes. And I want to go to NIPDEC, where you quoted in your discourse to us, suppliers of tender drugs receive duty-free letters as approved by the Ministry of Health and are required to deliver the goods directly to NIPDEC's warehouse, and that's on page 3 of your presentation. And the question is, what mechanisms does the Ministry of Health and NIPDEC employ to ensure that the quality of drugs imported are not contaminated during transit?
I would ask my head of pharmacies to respond.
Okay, in terms of contamination, are we looking at cold storage items, and in terms of maintenance of the cold chain? That's two different things, so I'm trying to understand. Is it the maintenance of the cold? Okay, so our suppliers, they are responsible for transportation of the supplies to the warehouse. When the supplies, especially cold storage items, are delivered, they are inspected. We would use our temperature guns, and we would check the thermometers. The suppliers also have these temperature gauges that we can also download the information in terms of temperature throughout the whole transportation course, so we can now track and determine whether it remained within the required storage temperatures. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of contamination, based on the way in which these drugs are stored and packaged, it's very unlikely for items to become contaminated. There's the external packaging, and then there's also the internal packaging that forms additional protection for the items as they are transported to the warehouse. If an item is for some reason compromised, then based on our contract with the suppliers, we have the right to reject the items. So this forms part of a supplier's evaluation. So in terms of the delivery, the requirements for proper storage and delivery of items, they are actually measured, and this information is used in terms of our evaluation.
Yeah.
Yes, in terms of the system that is currently available. So any item that doesn't meet our specifications, they are rejected, and the supplier has to either replace the stock or provide a credit in that regard.
But ma'am,
go ahead. Hold on. On another aspect, again quoting from the document provided by NIPDEC, if short-dated drugs items are utilized, the items are quarantined for disposal until a board of survey is conducted, and that's on page 4 of your document. How frequently does the board of survey meet at your institution?
Chair, through you. Remember, maybe I can take that. The border survey is done by the Ministry of Health on request from NIPDEC. We're currently doing a border survey right now to treat with some of the expired drugs, and the intention going forward is that we want to do it annually.
Is there any possibility of these expired drugs getting back into the market back in any way?
So after the border survey is done, the drugs are destroyed, and that is a supervised process. Depending on the manufacturer specifications, it determines the method of disposal. So the drugs are destroyed.
You see, we have...
One additional,
okay, sure.
just to follow up and to close off on that end. And again, NIPDEC monitors the stock at the private pharmacies and retrieves any stock that is nearing expiry. What are the systems in place in order to monitor these stock at these private institutions, these private pharmacies? Is it done, on what basis is it these?
Earlier on, you did ask a question, what our monitors do. Is one of the things that we do, and we visit every pharmacy at least once every 2 months. When drugs are actually coming close by the expiry date, we take that back into service and try to redistribute them in fast-moving areas where they're likely to be dispensed. If drugs are not dispensed during that time, we actually retain those and we dispose as part of the disposal process, as explained by my colleague earlier on the board of survey.
Okay. And final question, Mr. Chairman. In terms of shortages of the CDAP drugs, again, I don't know if it's for NIPDEC or from the Ministry of Health. You know, sometimes we have complaints of individuals not getting, certain items and so on. What will be the main causes of those absenteeism of those drugs on the market?
So because we have a wide network of pharmacies distributing CDAP drugs, we have 252, 262. Prior to September of 2018, we would have distributed to pharmacies every 2 months. So the distribution from central stores going to the individual pharmacies was on a 2-month cycle. There was a caveat that they could actually, if there was stockouts at the individual pharmacies, they could order up to 6 items ad hoc, but that is at the discretion of the individual pharmacies. So there may be a perceived stockout. At the C40 level, in the recent past, there have been no stockout of the CDAP items. But there could be a perceived stockout. For instance, if you visit one pharmacy and they run out of one item for a period of time, you may perceive as a patient that there's a stockout of that drug, but it may be available at another pharmacy. So to tighten it up, we brought the dispensation process. So from 2 months, we went to 1 month. So we're now delivering to every pharmacy at 1 month cycles, which we have seen some great improvement in terms of the stock at the individual pharmacies based on it. And we're trying to get the pharmacists, even in between the month, if they have stockouts, to do their orders quickly based on the 6 item, so that we make sure that everybody has their stock. Right, so the process is, for CDAP first, if they can't complete the whole script, they're supposed to refer you to another pharmacy to have your script filled. So that's the process in general, and it occurs in the public sector as well.
You mentioned that there's still destruction of drugs that have been expired. So then why is there wastage occurring in this time? Do you have an idea the cost factor, how many, the cost of the drugs that has been destroyed? And if so, what have you put in place now to prevent that from happening in future?
Chair, so let me just answer again your second question first. Well, the first one, quantum of the drugs, it is approximately, I think it's about 1.8% of our overall annual drug budget. Globally, I think the standard is normally about approximately 5% or thereabouts in terms of expired drugs in any system. All right, so currently we are about 1.8% or thereabouts. With regard to what we can do to minimize that even further, I would let NIPDEC speak to the process they use in terms of monitoring the stock at the public sector pharmacies also. It's not just CDAP.
And what about the hospitals? If in the hospitals that medication is supplied, not CDAP drugs, do you have a system to monitor the pharmacies there?
We do, and that's what I want maybe NIPDEC could just share a bit in terms of what process we utilize there.
In terms of the monitoring of expiration dates on the items, what we have been doing for the last few years, couple of years, we would send an alert to the institutions. There's a monthly alert that is sent, and this would then provide the institutions and the managers there with a 6 months report on all items that are about to expire over the next 6-month period. So it gives them the opportunity to rotate within the RHAs, to utilize the items, and the policy is all items that are unutilized should be returned to the warehouse before 3 months. Shelf life is now past. So in terms of our opportunity to utilize those items, once it's returned to the warehouse, we would then recirculate, redistribute, and try to have the items utilized. If for some reason there is no possibility of utilizing these items and they happen to expire on our hands, we have to quarantine the items for disposal. But most of it is really being proactive in terms of providing data and information to the institutions so they can utilize the items before the items actually expire.
Chair, would you please allow me to add to that? There's one thing that I think that we must realize as well is that there would always be a certain amount of drugs that would pass its use-by date. And that accounts for, from time to time, you have to have a certain amount of drugs in the system to actually create for emergencies, a certain amount of drugs that you hope that you never use, like anti-venom drugs. And in addition to that, some of the drugs come from quite far, and sometimes takes quite a long time to get here. So you need to stock a certain amount to make sure that the country could be adequately supplied, just in case. So there will always be some quantity of drug in the system that you will not be able to use and will pass the set-by date, but we are well within the national and international guidelines for that. At present, as my colleague just said, we are running at about 1.8, where the standard is about 5%.
Do we have access of the flu vaccines available in the sense that we may have too much that may expire soon? Do you have any figures of that?
Yes, so the flu vaccine actually we used up when we ordered, and this is through the revolving fund of PAHO. So when we ordered this year, we would have ordered 75,000, which is similar to last year. And we actually had to buy 50,000 more thereafter. So we actually used up all 75 early on into the flu season, and we had to buy some more. We used, out of the additional 50, we would have used more than half by now. So we somewhere close to 100,000 doses of flu given out. We have about 25,000 left in the system.
And you think that would be used?
Still going into the end of this flu season, which is the end of May, early part of June, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more of a statement than a question, because in listening to your responses, I realize there's a lot of information that the ministry would have in relation to drugs, its usage, and feedback it would get from pharmacies and maybe even doctors. So I'm wondering if there's anything in the pipeline at the ministry to utilize that information by way of a database for convenience for citizens. So for example, you said monthly you're able to, this is the CDAP program, deliver drugs to the pharmacies. So therefore, if you had that database and that information packaged in a website form, it means a customer, which is a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, could type in the prescription that the doctor has given and find out which pharmacies carry it. That's just use of the database that you all would have, something that you're collecting that's just sitting there right now and used for the convenience of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Another thing is the feedback that you would get by way of the health, general health of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So if you see diabetes drugs going up in demand, you know there's an increase in diabetes in the country. And you guys, at the Ministry of Health by way of the usage of drugs would get a better indicator of the general health of the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago, what diseases are trending upwards and which ones are trending downwards. Is that information that you all can put together, capture, and then put out into the public domain for educational purposes?
Through you, Chair, member, that is exactly what we're doing. So, for example, you mentioned diabetes, you have hypertension, you have your cardiovascular diseases, which all, there's a CDAP, those are on CDAP, and we see the numbers in terms of the uptake and the usage of drugs for those conditions, and those are all what you call non-communicable diseases, your lifestyle diseases. The Ministry has taken that on board because we currently have our NCD program where we are educating the public about exercise, drinking water, eating healthy. It's called our TT Moves campaign. So that we've actually used that data to inform our public education campaign. So we have been doing that.
Before, member, I would like to ask a question. Ms. Sunrose, you had mentioned that the cold chain is important for vaccines, because if you do not have proper storage of these vaccines, those are live attenuated virus inside most of those vaccines. And if you do not have proper storage in terms of a fridge to keep it at a certain temperature, those vaccines could spoil and be of no use. I want to direct the question to the ministry. The health centers you have available, do they have a generator in case there is a power outage and those vaccines could spoil? Yeah.
So most of the newer health facilities that have been built in the recent past would have been built with generator capacity. Vaccines can, beyond electrical disruption, they should be maintained between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius. There's transport, ways to transport them outside of that. So if there's a fail in a particular health center, for instance, they can use the cold chain mechanism, which they use for storage, as a backup in the event that they need to store it for even a day or two. So they use certain types of packs, package it in a certain way so that it stays within that limit until the electricity comes back in the few that still don't have generators.
So have you ensured that your health centers have these packages available?
Yeah, all of them do. And they can even piggyback on their neighboring health centers, so they can move it from one health center to the next. If it's a planned outage or a long period, they can actually move it and go to their sister health center.
Yeah.
Chairman, permit me, and just to dovetail on the question you asked, Dr. Roshan, what happens if electricity goes at midnight? And the newer health centers, you said, they have a system in place. What about the older health centers? Don't they not carry these important drugs?
Yeah, they do. And
so what happens in the event?
Right, so if electricity, with vaccines, they are allowed a certain length. If you have something in a refrigerated, most of them have a small refrigerator in terms of the size that they store their vaccines in. Generally speaking, if electricity goes overnight, the temperature, internal temperature of the refrigerator, and they have packs within that as well, is usually maintained somewhere around 24 hours. So the temperature wouldn't there wouldn't be an excursion beyond 8 degrees Celsius in that time frame, by which time generally someone can come in and remove the vaccines and take them to another site.
Is there a shortage of tetanus vaccines in the country?
No.
No, because I think the supplier, some doctors are complaining about that. So there
hasn't been a national shortage.
So,
Again, member, to NIPDEC. Again, in your discourse, on the table on the first page, with regards to indicate the number of pharmacies involved in dispensing drugs under the chronic disease assistance program, CDEP, over the last 5 years. Up to April 2019, we are estimated at 248. Could you give a projection on where we could end in terms of the other figures given from 2014 to 2018? You have a projected figure of where we could end at in terms of numbers?
Just seeking clarification, you're asking at the end of 2019, how many pharmacies we are likely to have in the program?
248.
From the 248, where we could end up?
Right. Do you have a projected figure where you can end at 2019?
Yes, we have a projected figure.
Could you share it with us?
We know we have about 25 pharmacies waiting to come into the program. We have suspended those pharmacies on the program because we're doing the development of an inventory management system It's given us a little bit of a butter, but as soon as we fix them, we were hoping to actually bring those pharmacies on.
Right. And then in table number 3, same thing at the below there. 2018, 2019, we at 11 million, 11.2. What's the estimated figure to end of 2019?
Let me pass that one on, please.
And in terms
Sorry,
of,
it wouldn't go beyond 40.6
and in terms of
million.
budgetary allocation with the Minister of Finance, well, to your Minister of Health, to the Ministry of Finance, you estimated to get
40.
that figure in order to
Yes.
ensure that CDAP would not fall, people wouldn't be complaining, coming to the Member of Parliament offices to ensure that, you know,
We have
they're not
already
getting their
received
CDAP.
that commitment. We
Pardon?
have already received that commitment.
You have received the commitment already?
Could I just add, if you would permit me through the chair, that as far as financing for drugs is concerned, we haven't had a problem, for at least in the past 12 months since I've been at NIPDEC.
Mr. Rahman, you wanted to comment?
I just wanted to add that the projection could be much larger. There's an issue. We have had a proliferation of opening of pharmacies, maybe around 30 or so. That is apart from the persons that have been suspended. But there's a new procedure now, I'm hearing it is reduced, where all pharmacies on the program got everything free. And now there's a new prohibitive procedure where for all the pharmacies that have opened, they cannot serve their community with CDAP because the cost is $68,000 to start the CDAP program. All pharmacies up to date, which would have been 240 plus the 30 that have been suspended, got everything free. And it even is apparently a little discriminatory that for people to start now, as in new pharmacies, they have to find $68,000 to start, which they have been complaining that they can't find after they have spent their money on stock. And what that is causing is that the pharmacies, whereas community members of our community are supposed to get some relief because people are finding the nooks and crannies to open pharmacies, they cannot, the citizens cannot access CDAP from those pharmacies and have to continue going very far to get it because they cannot find $68,000 to start the program.
Mr. Chairman, just 1 second. When you say got everything free, for the listening public, just identify.
Yeah, to start the program, to apply for the program, you apply, you send your pharmacy license, you send your practicing certificate, they monitor you for a little while, they approve you, and you start getting a supply of pharmaceuticals to dispense. Now, when they finish monitoring you, you need, that is the last venue, you need to find $68,000 for them to say, okay, you are on the program.
And that is clearly identifying a policy document, a procedural document, I would presume, Ministry of Health. So because
more than policy is a requirement.
Right, no, but you see, you made this statement in light that, you know, it's a problem also, but once the Ministry of Health has clearly identified to the pharmacy board and to the various pharmacies that, well, this is the procedure, free in the first instance, and then after that, the $68,000 will fall into play.
No. Isn't that for the new entrance
Yes.
into the
Yes.
market, not the existing
Not the existing
pharmacies?
ones, yes.
But why is there a
Isn't that
need?
so?
Could the ministry explain, for the benefit, why is there a need now to have that fee? Because as Mr. Rahman said, you have people opening pharmacies in little nooks and crannies, and it'll be a disservice if those persons are not able to get the CDAP drugs. Why is there a need for $68,000?
Chair, so the $68,000 speaks to the startup cost, which is basically for the hardware, the infrastructure. As Mr. James would have mentioned, we are implementing an inventory management system across the CDAP program throughout all private pharmacies. That cost covers the hardware costs. The ministry through NIPDEC would still be providing the drugs at no cost to the pharmacies. We will be meeting the internet cost for the connectivity cost, and the pharmacists are still paid the dispensing fees. So that fee that is being mentioned is really for the hardware to facilitate the inventory management system.
So the old pharmacies, the pharmacies would not have to pay that? Or do they have to come on board with some sort of fee in future?
No, they don't, because they would have had the old system, so they're being migrated across to the new system.
Yes, sir.
So therefore, those who exist and are going to get, if the cost is to be allocated to this new system, then the existing ones are going to get this new system also, free of charge, whereas others have to pay.
Yeah.
If I may, the pharmacies, if we want to call it old pharmacies that were using the system, they were using a dual system. So they were using a dial-up module, and they were using the newer system, what we're calling the newer system. So they had it already. What we're asking the new pharmacies to come on board with is to actually purchase the hardware and software related to the new module, because we're in the process of doing a migration. We're going to terminate the old dial-up system once we completed all aspects which Mr. James alluded to of testing. So the older pharmacies are coming away from the analog system and they're going strictly to a wireless, the new system. So persons that are coming onto it will be buying the same hardware that the old pharmacists would have had already and would have been given to them.
Will be paid the 68,000?
The new pharmacies.
No, the old one coming onto the new system.
They would have had that from this. They would have had that from the inception as well.
I find that somewhat unfair.
Well, not only unfair, it's unfair to the population who depending on the CDAP drugs. I mean,
Chairman, I disagree. Why is that unfair? You have new entrants coming in.
A new entrants coming in, but then you see it's really for...
Because if they don't pay that, am I not correct? The government has to assume that cost?
That's correct.
To provide the CDAP drugs for the underprivileged. So you may now prevent, certain areas, as Mr. Rahman said, from, not getting the CDAP drugs. It's an initiative from the government. Hey, we are providing these drugs at this, no cost. So somehow you may be preventing certain areas. So I think you wanted to make some comments.
Mr. Chairman, but as Mr. Rahman mentioned, it means now that every individual going into the pharmacy business now. Yes, you are a registered pharmacy. You're going into to open up the thing in order to guarantee. So as he said, we have to monitor, as you said, control, and then go forward. And again, yes, we know that the government would have provided the subvention then. Again, all things being equal now, I think everything has to be reviewed and assessed in going forward. Yeah,
Chairman, I'm not here to argue any case on behalf of the ministry or NIPDEC, but from where I sit as a citizen of this country, if the government is engaged in providing CDAP, you have a number of pharmacies already in train delivering that service. If you're changing your system, the Ministry of Health is looking at cost containment. If this is a piece of hardware that is required by pharmacies coming into the system, you need this piece of hardware. Why should the government pay for that piece of hardware?
If I may add, the program was started because of lack of access to CDAP drugs or drugs related to those programs, cardiovascular programs, way back when. That was the rationale for starting the program. We have begun the process through the CDAP steering committee to look at the accessibility of these drugs to the population at large. Looking at the public sector as well, when it started at the inception, we would have had much less public sector pharmacies to deliver drugs. We have quite a lot more over the number of years. I think it would have started in this iteration way back 2004 thereabouts. So over that period of time, we have a lot more public sector capacity. We have the spread when we look at the geographic information systems mapping of the public sector and private sector pharmacies. We think at this point that the access to the population is adequate. So at this point going forward and adding to the program is not to the benefit, I believe, in terms of the population. When we look at the maps, there's two areas that stand out with accessibility. There's the southeast and the northeast of the country that lack access. Those are the rural areas, and some of them don't even have private pharmacies there. So we are trying to beef up the public sector response in those areas. But this is, to the most part at this point, we think that the CDAP is doing what it started out to do. If people want to come on now, because of the constraints financially and otherwise, and the sustainability of the program, we have to offer it that the hardware is borne by the pharmacist or the pharmacy up front, and we can support otherwise.
Let me just add to that. As CMO said, those government pharmacies that are in rural areas, we have extended the pharmacy hours. So they're not just closing at 4 o'clock anymore. We have extended the pharmacy hours beyond 4 p.m. so person can still access the pharmacies. So that is also something we've been putting in place.
If you allow me, please, Chair, the cost is not $60,000. We've managed to negotiate that to $35,000. So it's much lower than originally intended.
Mr. Ford?
I think just from the communication process that we have seen this morning,
You want to say?
in terms of collaboration
Yes,
among health, NIPDEC, the pharmacy board, in terms of this particular aspect, you all communicate in terms of going forward, correspondence, verbally, however, you all have, what sort of communication you all have along the lines? Well, yeah, each head could give me a little feedback.
Yeah, well, under our act, the minister has a facility to send to the registrar for any information he requires. So that is utilized on a reasonably ongoing basis. Secondly, we communicate with the Drug Inspectorate Division of the ministry because we have to get licenses for all pharmacies for antibiotics and narcotics annually. So there is a significant interaction. We interact with the Chemistry, Food and Drug for controlled drug licenses. And then, well, NIPDEC in relation to any problems that may happen, they do communicate and tell us when pharmacies have been having problems on the system. So I think we have a reasonably good rapport.
In research of NIPDEC, part of our strategy, or part of our overall strategy, we talk about business relationships, and we do 4 key things. We collaborate with our stakeholders, we try to improve our networking, we create productive partnerships, and we try to increase our brand loyalty. Specifically, with respect to the ministry, we manifest that by having regular meetings with the ministry and with the minister as well to try and deal with the issues that we have. We work very collaboratively to actually bring about results and improvements in the CDAP system that we have some responsibility for in working in partnership with the Ministry of Health.
And that's across the board, not only when there's a financial problem or anything like that. Generally.
Across the board. I meet with the Minister and the Ministry of Health on a monthly basis. I also meet from time to time with the chief executives of the regional health authorities to try and understand what's happening there. I actually have people in the regional health authorities as monitors as well to check what's actually happening there as well. And indeed, we actually have the monitors with pharmacy, and we report that back out on a regular basis. Any problems we find, we try to resolve them amicably.
Yes.
Chair, well,
Does any other members have any other questions, or that's it? So,
no, just the comment from the PS now.
Okay, sure, sorry.
Communication.
Well, I was just going to just say there's nothing much I can add.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
We just want to be sure.
Good. So, I would like to invite the chief officials, if you could make brief closing remarks, and starting from, Mr. Rahman, as you on that end.
Yes, the main thing is that there were quite a few allegations that were made, and I am asking for an opportunity to respond to them in detail, because natural justice will dictate so. I'll give you one example of evidence. If the pharmacy board is not efficient in the granting of licenses, from January the 31st, no pharmacy will be sold antibiotics, narcotics, controlled drugs, or third schedule drugs, all the antihypertensive, diabetes, and so on. So there is an allegation that they don't know when the pharmacy board is open, if they have to drop it somewhere for me, and so on. I am saying that there is proof that there is no public outcry as of today, because from January the 31st, wholesalers stopped issuing pharmacies with antibiotics, narcotics, control, and third schedule. So I'm giving you an example of why natural justice would dictate that I get an opportunity to respond to all the various allegations that have been made.
You could please provide your response in writing, and I'd like to just inform you, the personnel here this morning, that this afternoon, especially Ministry of Health, that we intend to invite you to come back on June the 26th to continue this discussion, because there are a lot of answers that, we may have to still work on too. Would member of the School of Pharmacy please give closing remarks? Brief closing remarks.
Yes, Chair. So we are well through our improved program PharmD, and next time we would like to meet with the introduction of PharmD program along with the MSc, specialized MScs in pharmacy practice, where improved training can be provided to the pharmacists.
Thank you. Would officials from the NIPDEC, the National Insurance Property Development, Mr. Terence James, probably give us some closing remarks?
Thank you very much, Chair. As always, NIPDEC is indeed a partner in development, and in this regard, we were responsible for the strategic procurement, storage, and distribution of pharmaceutical items. And I want to say it has been indeed a pleasure and a privilege, as I said from the onset, and we are excited, we are enthused to play our part in exercising the necessary due diligence for the development of pharmacy and pharmacy operations in Trinidad and Tobago. We thank you for considering our participation as necessary in informing your decisions, and look forward to whatsoever support we can give in the future. Once again, thank you very much.
Thanks. Would Mr. Asif Ali, Permanent Secretary, give some closing remarks?
Thank you, Chair and members, for the questions, the discussions. We've taken on board some of the suggestions and recommendations. Let me just deal with a few of those. The whole issue of the mystery shopper item with regard to the possible errant practices of the pharmacists, we would have taken that on board in terms of how we can action that. The issue of further dialogue with the university in terms of marrying, and not just for pharmacists, but the issue of training of persons and whether there's a market, at least in the public sector to start with, to receive the absorptive capacity, to have continuing discussions on that. The issue of the fees for the pharmacy board, I've taken that on board, and Mr. Rahman, we can expedite any request that is sent to us officially so that we can treat to speak with that issue of processing any increase for fees through the relevant channels. And lastly, the issue of governance. Member British Primus did ask a question that I had some difficulty treating with, and that whole speaks to the whole issue of the regulatory bodies in the sector, and what is the relationship between the ministry and those bodies in terms of accountability and oversight. That's something we have to look at, and we will be doing that. Again, thank you very much, Chair.
Well, I would like to thank all of you officials for the information you have given us. I would like to thank members of the media for their attendance, and also thank my committee members and staff for your participation and support. And if there's no further business for consideration, I would like to declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you. Good.